Do you know that line that separates right from wrong? The one you once swore you would never cross? Well, the problem is that in real life, that line isn't always so clear. Sometimes it fades gradually, almost imperceptibly, until before you realize it, it's already gone. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about today. A story of betrayal and infidelity that began with an innocent detail and ended where no one expected. What drives someone to cheat? Is it the exhaustion of routine? The search for something that was lost? Or do certain connections simply happen, regardless of our will? What you are about to hear is not just another story of infidelity. It's a real account, filled with raw emotions, inner conflicts, and decisions that changed lives forever. And deep down, you might realize that this story isn't as far from your reality as you imagine. Get ready to dive into an intense narrative where desire intertwines with guilt, and every choice brings unexpected consequences. But before we continue, answer me this. How far do you believe a betrayal can be justified? Is there a limit? Or does it all depend on the circumstances? Leave your opinion in the comments. And if you want more impactful stories like this one, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because here, the truth always comes to light, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. Her marriage had always been a safe harbor. Stability, companionship, a predictable routine. But who said predictable is synonymous with happiness? Over time, the passion that once ignited their nights faded, replaced by practical conversations about bills and grocery lists. There were no epic fights, just a subtle wear and tear, a distance no one dared to name. Until their son, Ethan, turned 21, bringing with him a new energy to the house. Parties, friends, laughter echoing through hallways that had been so silent before. Amid these lively gatherings, the house was filled with life, and she found herself smiling for no reason, infected by that vibrant energy. Conversations that once revolved around responsibilities now turned to travels, dreams, and the endless possibilities that youth carries. But deep down, an uncomfortable question arose. When was the last time she felt that excitement? When did she stop being that woman who also dreamed, who also longed for something beyond the predictable? It was as if, by observing her son's youth, she realized how far she was from her own essence. The transformation came as a whisper, almost imperceptible. Small details began to take on meaning. The music playing in the background, the conversations that awakened old memories, the sparkle in her eyes she hadn't seen reflected in the mirror for years. The home, once the stage of her rigid routine, now seemed invaded by a new breeze, bringing with it the memory of who she once was. And in the midst of it all, among the guests that filled her living room, there was a name that would soon stand out. Among the many young faces passing through her house, one caught her attention in a way that unsettled her. Ryan. At 24, he wasn't just another one of Ethan's friends. There was something different about him, perhaps the confidence in his gaze, the way he spoke, or simply the fact that he saw her in a way no one else did. While the others got lost in conversations about video games and social media, Ryan showed a genuine interest in what she had to say. And that attention, absent from her life for so long, awakened something in her that she barely dared to name. At first, she tried to rationalize it. It was natural to enjoy feeling heard, valued. But it didn't take long for her to realize that it wasn't just that. There was a subtle tension in their conversations, a silent game of glances that seemed to test invisible boundaries. Ryan asked questions that challenged her, bringing to the surface memories that had long been buried. They talked about music, books, about things that once ignited her passion but had been swallowed by routine over the years. Every word exchanged with him made her feel less invisible, as if she were emerging from a long period of numbness. And then came the unsettling realization. It wasn't just about being noticed. It was about wanting to be noticed by him. Ryan made her remember the woman she used to be, vibrant, full of dreams and desires. And that reflection of herself, so unexpectedly recovered, left her torn between guilt and fascination. It was still just a subtle game. Nothing had happened. But deep down, she knew she was treading dangerous ground. And the worst part? She didn't want to leave it. She tried to ignore it, to convince herself it was just a passing moment, a meaningless fantasy. But the truth crept into her thoughts like a repetitive melody. She craved those conversations. She missed Ryan's glances when he wasn't around. And worse, she began to notice the contrast between him and her husband. Her husband's words were automatic, predictable. Ryan, on the other hand, listened to her with an almost hypnotic attention. It was as if, after so long, someone saw her soul and not just her role within a marriage. Still, the guilt didn't leave her. The marriage, despite the lack of passion, was still the foundation of her life. There were years of history, commitments, promises made. But what happens when those promises feel more like a burden than a foundation? Her mind was a battlefield between the desire to remain faithful to what she had built and the visceral need to feel alive again. And Ryan, unknowingly, was the spark reigniting her essence. The danger wasn't just in what could happen, but in the certainty that, within her, something was already changing. Then came the first real hesitation, the first step beyond the invisible line. The simple act of seeking Ryan out in conversations, of wanting to be where he was already a breach of limits. Small casual touches, smiles that lingered a second too long. The dangerous game between what was allowed and what was forbidden intensified. She knew she needed to stop, but she also knew she didn't want to. Because for the first time in a long time, she felt like more than just a wife or a mother. She felt desired. And that feeling was addictive. The moment happened almost inevitably. It was as if everything had led to this. The conversations, the glances, the tension that had been building with each encounter. That night, while the house was silent for a brief moment, Ryan and she found themselves alone in the kitchen. There were no grand words, just a look that said everything. The world seemed to slow down. Then, without either of them making a conscious decision, it happened. The kiss. Intense, forbidden, loaded with everything she had been trying to deny to herself. For a second, it was as if the universe had shifted on its axis. The touch, the closeness, the warmth of the skin, everything was a reaffirmation that there was still passion inside her, buried beneath years of routine. But reality hit with brutal force. The sound of the front door opening. Ethan was back. The shock made her pull away from Ryan in a near-desperate reflex, her heart racing as if she had just committed a crime. And in a way she had. Guilt came like a jolt, a cold wave contrasting with the heat of the moment before. She tried to act natural, but something inside her had changed forever. Now, it wasn't just a silent fantasy, a thin line that hadn't yet been crossed. The line was erased. And the worst part? A part of her didn't want it to have been interrupted. The questions began to flood in. What did that moment mean? What would happen now? Ryan seemed calm, as if he had always known this would happen sooner or later. But she wasn't sure about anything anymore. She only knew that she had started something she might no longer be able to control. The following days were a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Guilt settled in like a persistent shadow, but at the same time, there was undeniable excitement. Every time she crossed paths with Ryan, she felt warmth rush through her skin. The problem was that now there was no turning back. The kiss hadn't just been a slip, it had opened a door, and locking it again seemed impossible. She found herself replaying that moment in her mind, every detail etched as if it were a scene from a movie. The worst part wasn't remembering. The worst part was wanting it to happen again.
And it did.
This time, without hesitation. Another kiss more intense, more charged with desire. There were no more excuses, no more justifications. The world around them dissolved when they were together. But this surrender came at a high price. She knew she was walking on thin ice, that every step forward was a greater risk. The betrayal was no longer just a thought, a distant possibility. It was real, tangible. And the fear of being discovered started to share space with the forbidden pleasure consuming her. How could she reconcile these emotions? How could she go back to being the woman she was before Ryan? Marriage became a distorted reflection. Her husband, unaware, continued living as if nothing had changed. But for her, everything had changed. Every touch, every word exchanged inside that house now felt like theater. And she, the protagonist of a story of infidelity she never imagined she would live. But what if, deep down, this betrayal was just a symptom of something bigger? Something that had been broken for a long time but had only now become impossible to ignore? These questions had no answers, only one certainty. Ryan had awakened something she could no longer pretend didn't exist. Now tell me, after everything that happened, what would you do in her place? Would you forgive yourself or carry that guilt forever? Infidelity isn't just an act. It's a whirlwind of emotions, choices, and consequences that can completely change someone's life. But what few people talk about is that betrayal often doesn't begin at the moment of the kiss. It starts much earlier, in the silences, in the loneliness within the relationship, in the longing to feel something that no longer exists. The big question here isn't just about right or wrong, but about what drives someone to cross that line. And more importantly, how to deal with it afterward. Have you ever been through something similar? Do you know someone who has lived a story of betrayal and infidelity like this? Share your opinion in the comments. Your perspective might help others see the situation from a different angle. And if you feel that this story sparked important reflections, take this moment to look at your own life and ask yourself, am I truly living the way I want? If this story held your attention until now, it means there's much more for you to discover. So, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because there's a lot more coming your way. Real stories, deep reflections, and truths that few have the courage to say out loud. Don't stay out of this conversation. Let's uncover together what no one tells you about human relationships.